Have you ever wondered why a man grows restless when a woman becomes silent? It is not merely the absence of her words that unsettles him, but the vastness of what that silence contains. In the stillness of her gaze, in the quiet refusal to explain, he feels something ancient stirring within him, the confrontation with his own shadow. For centuries, men have sought to control, to define, to frame women within the boundaries of their understanding. Yet when a woman withdraws her voice, when she no longer pleads, argues, or justifies, she places him in front of a mirror he cannot escape. That silence becomes the echo of his deepest fears, because it strips away his illusions of dominance and reveals the hollowness of his unexamined self. In Jungian psychology, silence is not emptiness but fullness. It is the language of the unconscious, the whisper of archetypes that transcend spoken words. The silence of a woman is the silence of the great mother archetype, who nurtures and devours, who offers life and demands transformation. When she withdraws her verbal presence, she embodies an energy that penetrates the male psyche more deeply than any argument could. Suddenly, he is confronted with the abyss of his own inadequacy, the fragility of his ego, and the truth he has tried to outrun, that his worth is not confirmed by her approval but tested by her withdrawal. The man fears this because he is addicted to noise, noise that reassures him, noise that feeds his fragile sense of importance. He thrives when she explains, when she justifies, when she shouts in anger, because in her words he finds proof that he still occupies her mental and emotional space. Even conflict serves his ego, for it confirms that she still invests energy in him. But when she turns to silence, he loses his footing. He wonders, *, is she done with me? Has she seen through me? Has she outgrown what I offered? *, in that unspoken realm, his imagination becomes his tormentor, projecting every insecurity he has buried under charm, bravado, or control. You see, silence dismantles his illusions because it denies him the script he has rehearsed. He expects a woman to fight, to cling, to seek resolution, but when she simply detaches, she severs the invisible cords of his dominance. Her stillness whispers a truth he cannot bear, that she does not need him to define her. And this realization threatens the very foundation of his identity, which often rests upon being needed, being desired, being pursued. Stoic philosophers like Seneca and Marcus Aurelius understood this truth centuries ago. They taught that fear arises not from the event itself, but from our perception of it. A man's fear of a woman's silence is, in essence, a fear of himself. He dreads facing the void within, the silence inside his own soul, which her withdrawal reflects with merciless clarity. The silence of a woman becomes the silence of his neglected conscience, the echo of the inner voice he has long suppressed beneath ambition, desire, and distraction. And have you noticed this shift? Have you seen how quickly the confident man begins to unravel when you no longer explain yourself, when your voice becomes a calm sea instead of a raging storm? It is because your silence awakens in him the truth that cannot be tamed, that power is not found in noise, but in restraint. That dignity is not performed, but embodied. This is why silence is not weakness, it is power distilled. It is the refusal to feed chaos with more chaos, the conscious choice to let the other wrestle with his own demons instead of offering them a feast. Jung called this the process of individuation, when a person confronts their shadow, integrates their hidden self, and emerges whole. When you fall silent, you invite him into this confrontation, though he may resist it with all his strength. But remember this, his fear is not your burden to carry. His discomfort is not your responsibility to soothe. The silence you hold is not a weapon against him, but a sanctuary for yourself. In silence, you reclaim the energy once squandered in endless explanations. In silence, you restore your sovereignty. In silence, you remind both him and yourself that your worth was never dependent on his recognition. A man may secretly fear that your silence means he has lost control. In truth, it means you have reclaimed yourself. He may interpret it as abandonment, when in fact it is liberation. And in that liberation lies the most terrifying truth of all. The woman who has mastered her silence is untouchable, because she no longer bargains with her peace. The silence of a woman is not merely the absence of sound. It is a living force, a presence that expands in the spaces where words once filled the air. It becomes a mirror in which a man sees not her reflection, but his own fragmented self staring back at him. Jung would say that in her quiet withdrawal, she awakens the archetype of the anima within him, the feminine presence of his unconscious. This presence, long neglected, unsettles him because it carries both the power to soften and the power to expose. The anima whispers truths he has buried beneath layers of bravado, and in her silence, he cannot drown out its voice. For men who are unprepared to face their inner world, this encounter feels like disintegration. Suddenly, every flaw he has hidden, every insecurity he has numbed, comes rushing to the surface. He may become defensive, attempting to provoke her into breaking the silence, because her words, whether in anger, love, or even complaint, reassure him that he still matters. Without them, he fears invisibility. The quiet becomes unbearable because it is not neutral, it is charged with meaning. Her silence says, "I see you, but I will no longer participate in your illusions." This is where the dynamic turns. Many women do not realize that their silence is more eloquent than their speech. Words can be dismissed, twisted, or ignored. Silence cannot. It pierces straight into the psyche, awakening the shadow that no man wishes to face. And the shadow is not polite. It carries rage, envy, inadequacy, and fear. When confronted with a woman's silence, he is, in truth, confronted with his own shadow. He must ask, why does her detachment unsettle me so deeply? What part of me feels erased in her refusal to respond? For some men, this confrontation awakens growth. Silence becomes the threshold of self-reflection, a chance to evolve. For others, it awakens desperation. They might lash out, accuse, or attempt manipulation, not because they hold strength, but because they feel it slipping away. Their control was always fragile, dependent on her participation in the cycle of conflict and reconciliation. Without her words, the cycle collapses, and they are forced to stand naked before their own unhealed wounds. You might wonder why this silence holds such devastating power. It is because silence is sovereignty. It is the refusal to bleed energy where it is not honored. It is the boundary that does not need to be shouted, the dignity that does not need validation. In silence, a woman aligns with something greater than herself, what Jung would call the self, the wholeness that integrates both light and shadow. In silence, she becomes more than a partner in his drama. She becomes the keeper of her own destiny. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts." When a woman chooses silence, she is no longer dyed by his projections, accusations, or expectations. She becomes the painter of her own soul, the guardian of her inner world. And this terrifies him, because it is a power he cannot touch, cannot bend, cannot own. His fear is not that she is gone, but that she has become beyond reach, self-contained, untouchable, whole. You see, most men are conditioned to believe that control equals love, that dominance equals security. They fear silence because it dismantles this illusion. Her silence is a declaration that love cannot be commanded, that respect cannot be demanded, that presence cannot be forced. It exposes the truth that intimacy is earned, not imposed. Have you ever felt this shift within yourself? That moment when you stopped explaining, stopped arguing, stopped fighting for him to see your worth? That moment when the silence was not emptiness but liberation? That is the very moment he begins to fear losing you, not because you are gone, but because you are no longer his to define. His fear lies in the recognition that he cannot control what he cannot hear, cannot predict what he cannot read. Silence is mystery, and mystery is power. Jung knew that the human psyche is terrified of the unknown, yet drawn irresistibly toward it. In the silence of a woman, a man meets that unknown face to face. It is there that his illusions unravel, and hers are burned away, leaving only what is real. And the truth is this: silence is not the end of dialogue, it is the beginning of transformation. There is a reason why the silence of a woman feels heavier than words. Words can be measured, interpreted, even dismissed. Silence, however, is infinite. It carries no edges, no boundaries, no safe points to hold on to. It confronts a man with a vastness he cannot tame. In that vastness, his imagination awakens its most merciless tormentor, his own mind. He begins to weave stories. Asterisk, is she disappointed in me? Has she discovered my weakness? Has she moved beyond what I can give? Asterisk, the silence becomes a canvas where his insecurities paint themselves in vivid detail. Carl Jung understood this phenomenon deeply. He wrote of projection, the way humans cast their unconscious fears and desires onto others. A man, when confronted with a woman's silence, projects onto it the very truths he has avoided acknowledging within himself. If he fears inadequacy, her quiet becomes proof of his failure. If he fears abandonment, her detachment feels like rejection. If he fears betrayal, her stillness becomes a conspiracy in motion. She need not say a single word. His shadow speaks louder than her voice ever could. And this is why her silence terrifies him. It forces him into dialogue with his own unconscious. It dismantles the armor of logic and defense he has built, leaving him face to face with the part of himself he hoped no one would ever see. Her silence does not humiliate him, it awakens him. But awakening is rarely comfortable. For the woman, this silence is not always a calculated strategy. Often it is survival. It is the decision to step away from cycles that drain her spirit, to cease offering explanations to ears that only hear what they want. In choosing silence, she protects her essence. She learns what Marcus Aurelius meant when he wrote, asterisk, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. Asterisk, her silence becomes the fortress where her power rests, untouchable by his storms. But here lies the paradox. What terrifies him most also fascinates him most. He is drawn to the mystery she embodies, even as it unsettles him. This is the eternal dance of the masculine and the feminine, the pursuit of what cannot be possessed, the yearning for what resists definition. In her silence, she becomes both mirror and mystery. She reflects his shadow while concealing her depth. He wants to break the silence to regain his sense of control, but he also fears what may be revealed if she speaks. This duality is what makes silence so powerful. It is not passive, it is active restraint. It is not emptiness, it is fullness contained. Silence says, asterisk, I am here, but I will not be consumed by your chaos. I exist, but not for your validation. I feel, but my emotions are not yours to exploit. Asterisk, in silence, a woman reclaims her authority over her narrative. She denies him the stage where he performs his illusions, and in doing so, she forces him into his own confrontation. You listening now, understand this truth. When you step into silence, you are not surrendering. You are not abandoning your strength. You are, in fact, embodying it more profoundly than any words could. Words may plead or defend, but silence affirms. Silence says, asterisk, I owe no performance. I am complete without your recognition. Asterisk. And this is where his secret fear lies, in realizing that your completeness does not depend on him. That your silence is not absence but sovereignty. That in withdrawing your voice, you are not retreating but ascending. Jung would call this individuation, the moment when a woman ceases to be defined by another's gaze and becomes whole in herself. For the man who has built his identity on her reflection, this is a shattering revelation. Silence becomes a teacher to both. To her, it teaches boundaries, dignity, and the art of self-preservation. To him, it teaches humility, vulnerability, and the cost of ignoring his inner world. Yet whether he learns from it or resists it, the truth remains: silence changes everything. It rewrites the balance of power without ever raising a voice. And perhaps this is why silence endures as the most eloquent language of the feminine. Not because it hides, but because it reveals. Not because it surrenders, but because it transcends. Silence, in its purest form, is a confrontation with truth. A man may beg for words, even harsh ones, because words can be argued with, bent, reinterpreted. But silence denies him this comfort. It leaves him suspended in uncertainty, where his inner demons whisper louder than any external voice. This is why he secretly fears it. Silence refuses to participate in his illusions. It does not flatter, it does not negotiate, it does not soothe. It simply is. And in that being, it dismantles him. Jung spoke often of the shadow, the repressed aspects of the psyche that we deny, bury, or project onto others. When a woman falls silent, her presence becomes the perfect vessel for projection. He cannot hear her truth, so he fills the void with his own. His shadow steps forward, uninvited, and takes the stage. Suddenly, he imagines betrayal, rejection, superiority, or contempt in her quiet, when in reality it is his own inadequacy he perceives. Her silence reveals nothing of her, but everything of him. This is why the silence of a woman has the weight of revelation. It is not silence alone, but silence held with dignity, with self-possession, with the calm assurance of someone who no longer needs to explain. That kind of silence terrifies him, because it tells him she has crossed an invisible threshold. She is no longer bound to the emotional economy where he sets the rules. She has stepped into a higher ground where her worth is not up for negotiation. And you, have you not felt this power within yourself? That moment when you stopped arguing, stopped proving, stopped giving endless explanations, and instead allowed the silence to speak for you? Did you not notice how suddenly the air changed, how suddenly he faltered, how suddenly his certainty began to collapse? This is because silence is the voice of the untouchable woman. It is not passive retreat, but active reclamation. The Stoics understood this well. Epictetus wrote, "It is not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." The silence of a woman is the refusal to react on command, the refusal to be a puppet pulled into another's chaos. It is the embodiment of control, not over him, but over herself. And that control cannot be stolen, because it is rooted in her choice. But here is the deeper truth. Silence also awakens fear because it hints at transformation. A man senses, often unconsciously, that when a woman withdraws into silence, she is not merely withholding from him, she is turning toward herself. She is listening to her own inner voice, rediscovering her own needs, aligning with her own spirit. In her silence, she begins to heal. And nothing unsettles him more than the possibility that she might heal beyond him, grow beyond him, live beyond him. This is the fear behind his restlessness, behind his attempts to provoke her into breaking the silence. He fears becoming irrelevant. He fears that her world will continue without him, and that she will not only survive his absence but flourish in it. Her silence whispers the most frightening truth of all: I am whole without you. Silence also reshapes desire itself. For many men, the woman who no longer chases, who no longer seeks to be understood, becomes the most magnetic presence of all. Her silence stirs his hunger more than her attention ever did, because it signals self-sufficiency, mystery, and power. He may chase, but now it is a chase without guarantees. She is no longer accessible through the familiar games of validation and control. Her silence has shifted the entire dynamic. She has become the chooser, and he has become the uncertain one. And so, her silence is not merely an absence, it is a rebirth. It is a passage into the archetype of the sovereign woman, the one who does not chase, does not beg, does not collapse into need, but who stands as her own axis. In her silence, she embodies the eternal paradox of the feminine, soft yet unyielding, receptive yet immovable, present yet unreachable. For him, this silence is terror wrapped in beauty. For her, it is freedom wrapped in dignity. And once she has tasted this silence, she knows that her voice will never again be wasted where it is not heard. There comes a moment when a woman's silence is no longer a tactic, it is an awakening. She ceases to orbit around his reactions, his expectations, his desires, and instead centers herself. She listens to the rhythm of her own mind, feels the pulse of her own emotions, and honors the boundaries that preserve her energy. To him, this is alarming, almost intolerable, because he has been conditioned to measure connection by responsiveness. Her quiet reveals a world he cannot manipulate, a presence he cannot own. It exposes the fragility of his ego with relentless precision. In this state, the silence carries the gravitas of the archetypal wise woman, the crone or the sage, depending on which inner landscape she channels. She has learned, consciously or unconsciously, that words can often dilute power, that explanations can be exploited, and that emotional labor spent on those unworthy of it is a currency she will no longer trade. She does not speak to fill space. She speaks when her voice will carry resonance and consequence. And the man who once relied on her verbal engagement now finds himself in uncharted territory. He fears the unknown, for the unknown forces him to confront the limits of his self-conception. When a woman becomes silent, she does not merely withhold, she unmasks. She unmasks his projection, his unmet expectations, his concealed insecurities. He may attempt to fill her quiet with noise, provocation, persuasion, argument, but the silence is impenetrable. It is not designed to be broken. It is designed to reflect back what he refuses to see within himself. The Jungian shadow becomes especially alive in these moments. Men fear the silence because it mirrors their own unintegrated selves. All those impulsive reactions, the unexamined desires, the patterns of control, her stillness exposes them. It is terrifying because it demands honesty. And most men are unprepared to confront their own truths without the safety net of distraction or validation. The silence of a woman is uncompromising in this way. It calls for introspection, accountability, and growth, even when he resists it. Yet, there is an undeniable magnetism in this dynamic. The very thing that unsettles him, the mystery, the autonomy, the refusal to be consumed, becomes the source of his fascination. He is drawn to what he cannot possess, compelled by the enigmatic energy she radiates. Her silence transforms desire into a higher, more potent form, where he is no longer in control of her attention. She has become the chooser, and that reversal of power awakens both fear and longing. From the woman's perspective, this silence is an act of reclamation. It is the recognition that her energy is sacred, that her presence is powerful, and that her worth is inherent rather than conditional. Stoicism teaches that one's peace should not be dictated by external events, and in her silence, she embodies this principle fully. She cultivates strength not through confrontation, but through detachment, not through explanation, but through alignment with her own integrity. And when he finally perceives the depth of her silence, he senses that he is facing something eternal and immutable, a force that does not bend to desire, a presence that cannot be tamed. It is in this realization that fear transforms into respect, respect into longing, and longing into the painful acknowledgement that she exists beyond his capacity to control. He experiences a shadow of vulnerability he rarely allows himself to feel, because her stillness mirrors the untamed, independent, whole aspect of the feminine he has never fully embraced. Her silence is an invitation to transformation, not for her, but for him. It beckons him to confront his own limitations, to wrestle with his shadows, to face the truths he has long avoided. And yet, whether he accepts the lesson or resists, the woman continues to stand in her sovereignty, untouched by the storms he cannot master. It is in this quiet dominion that she discovers her own rebirth. She realizes that freedom does not come from their attention, their words, or their validation. Freedom comes from presence, from self-possession, from the unwavering commitment to honor her inner world. And when she walks in this power, the man who once feared her silence understands, in a trembling, undeniable way, the gravity of a woman who has reclaimed herself fully. Her silence eventually becomes the crucible in which her entire self is reforged. Each withheld word, each calm withdrawal from reactive cycles, shapes her into a being unassailable by need or external judgment. She begins to move through life with a rhythm that is no longer dictated by others' expectations, but by the pulse of her own inner authority. To the man who once sought to dominate her attention, this metamorphosis is both terrifying and irresistible. He senses that the woman before him is no longer tethered to his world. She has entered a domain where only she commands the narrative. In Jungian terms, she has integrated the self, her conscious mind aligned with the unconscious, the ego harmonized with the soul. This is the stage of individuation, where a person no longer functions as a fragment of someone else's story, but emerges fully as their own protagonist. Her silence is the evidence of this transformation. She does not need to speak to prove her strength, to assert her value, or to justify her choices. It exists inherently, radiating from her posture, her gaze, the effortless confidence that accompanies self-possession. The man, on the other hand, experiences a psychological dissonance he cannot easily articulate. The rules he has relied upon, attention as leverage, conflict as affirmation, pursuit as validation, no longer apply. His attempts to read her, predict her, or elicit a reaction fail because she has withdrawn from the game entirely. And in that vacuum, he encounters the terrifying question, who is she beyond my influence? This is the confrontation with the unknown that Jung considered essential for psychological growth. It is uncomfortable, because the unknown cannot be controlled, yet it is magnetic precisely for that reason. Her silence also functions as a subtle mirror of his inner life. In observing her self-containment, he cannot help but reflect upon his own vulnerabilities, his patterns of dependency, his unexamined emotional responses. Her quiet acts as a catalyst, pushing him toward introspection whether he desires it or not. In this way, her withdrawal is not merely an act of self-preservation. It is an invitation for him to confront his shadow, to face the aspects of himself he has long denied. And yet, the woman's power is never performative. She does not silence herself to punish or manipulate. She does so because she recognizes the profound efficacy of stillness. Words, she knows, can be misinterpreted, can be weaponized, can feed chaos. Silence, in contrast, is pure. It is an assertion of agency without aggression, of presence without concession, of dignity without apology. She becomes untouchable not because she is inaccessible, but because she has refused to expend her energy where it will not be honored. From the lens of Stoic philosophy, this is the ultimate exercise of internal sovereignty. Epictetus reminded us that external events are beyond our control, but our response to them lies entirely within our command. By stepping into silence, she demonstrates mastery over herself, over her reactions, over the tides of emotional turbulence that once dictated her behavior. Her voice, when spoken, is measured and potent. Her silence, when held, is eloquent and impenetrable. For the man, this elicits a profound emotional awakening. Fear and fascination intertwine as he navigates the magnetic tension of her quiet. He may attempt to reclaim the narrative, to provoke, to argue, to insist, but none of these strategies succeed against a woman who has claimed her center. He discovers that influence cannot be demanded, attention cannot be coerced, and respect cannot be purchased. He glimpses, with both awe and unease, the power of a woman aligned with her own self. And in witnessing this, he also learned something unavoidable. The cost of ignoring her autonomy was never hers to bear. It was his reckoning, his confrontation, his lesson. In her silence, she offers neither judgment nor resentment. She offers the purest reflection of what it means to be whole, to be untethered, to exist as her own axis. The paradox of silence is that it is both absence and presence. It is both refuge and revelation. It is both shield and sword. And for the woman who wields it wisely, it is liberation. She discovers that the world may tremble at her stillness, but she herself is unshaken. She realizes that no approval, no persuasion, no performance is required to validate her existence. Her power is intrinsic, her value inherent, her freedom complete. And so the silence of a woman reaches its apex not in absence, but in complete embodiment. It becomes a language that transcends words, a force that communicates the unassailable truth of her being. Every glance, every calm breath, every steady step speaks volumes more than any explanation ever could. In this quiet, she is no longer performing for anyone, no longer negotiating her worth, no longer sacrificing her energy to fill gaps that were never hers to fill. She has become the living expression of her own integrity, and it is in this state that the man's fear reaches its zenith. He fears what he cannot possess, what he cannot predict, what he cannot bend to his will. Her silence tells him, without uttering a sound, "I am mine. I am complete. I do not require your validation." And this truth is revolutionary, terrifying, intoxicating. For centuries, the masculine psyche has sought to define, contain, and possess the feminine. Yet here she stands, sovereign and untethered, a paradox that cannot be solved, only witnessed. Jung described the anima as the bridge to the unconscious, the feminine energy that draws the male psyche toward introspection, vulnerability, and transformation. When a woman claims her silence, she embodies the anima not as a muse or object of desire, but as a mirror and a teacher. She reveals to him the limitations of his ego, the patterns of his unhealed wounds, the illusions he has clung to for comfort. Her stillness unmasks his dependency, his control, his fears, all the elements of his inner world he would rather deny. Yet her silence is not cruelty. It is not punishment. It is an assertion of presence, a reclamation of power, and a celebration of sovereignty. The man who encounters her may respond with confusion, frustration, or even obsession, but his reactions are a testament to the potency of her alignment with herself. She does not need his comprehension, his approval, or his attempts at persuasion. She thrives in the freedom of her own voice and in the eloquence of her restraint. Consider this: every word she has withheld, every explanation she has refrained from offering, is a statement of self-possession. It is the embodiment of Stoic wisdom. Control what you can, accept what you cannot, and maintain your inner peace regardless of the turbulence around you. In choosing silence, she cultivates her own inner landscape, fortifying it against manipulation, exhaustion, and compromise. She creates a sanctuary in which her soul may flourish, uninterrupted by the demands or fears of another. And for him, the experience is both haunting and transformative. The fear he feels is not of her, but of himself. Her quiet illuminates his own inadequacies, his projections, his shadow traits, the parts of him he has ignored or buried under ego, desire, or distraction. Her stillness becomes a mirror, reflecting his own need for growth and self-awareness. He may resist, lash out, or attempt to reclaim her attention, but these efforts cannot pierce the armor of her self-possession. She has become untouchable because she is aligned with the self, whole, and unshakable. The paradox is exquisite. What terrifies him also captivates him. Her silence stirs a longing he cannot satisfy through conventional means, because it is not attention or affirmation he craves, but the mystery, the sovereignty, the radiant autonomy she embodies. He senses that she operates on a plane beyond his influence, and that very realization both unsettles and fascinates him. He is drawn to her precisely because she cannot be possessed. And in this dance of fear and fascination, she achieves the ultimate liberation. She no longer measures her worth against his gaze, no longer allows her emotions to be dictated by his reactions, no longer sacrifices her energy for validation she does not require. Her silence has become a language of empowerment, a declaration that her existence is complete, her value inherent, and her freedom absolute. The culmination of this journey is the most profound realization of all, that she is untouchable not because she resists, but because she knows. She knows that her worth is intrinsic, that her power is innate, and that her life does not require the approval of another to be full. In the eloquence of her quiet, she has mastered the art of being, the art of choosing, the art of sovereignty. And in witnessing her alignment with herself, the man learns, perhaps reluctantly, the deepest truth, that the presence of a whole woman is the most compelling force he will ever encounter, and that nothing he does can diminish it. Her silence is not absence. It is liberation. It is not surrender. It is sovereignty. It is not emptiness. It is the fullness of a woman who has claimed herself entirely. And it is in this state, radiant and untouchable, that she finally walks free, unbound by expectation, unshaken by fear, and untethered by the need for external validation. The woman who knows her worth doesn't chase, she chooses.